right, hey, welcome to the channel. This is Unchurched with Pastor Todd. I'm that guy. Really nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. If you have recently subscribed, thank you for that. If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing it. It's one of the easiest ways to help us grow this channel and get these sermons in front of more and more people. If you'd like to become a patron and support us financially, we spend most of that money on just production and getting these out there into the wider world. You can become a patron, patreon.com/unchurched. We're in a series called What He Said, where I'm exploring what Jesus had to say about life, God, and the meaning of everything. This is week 27. We've been in this for a long while. So if you've missed some of the weeks, you just go back on the channel. They're all listed there, along with the key thing that sermon is about. Today's sermon is exploring the concept of rejection. So this is a big one. It's really cool, and I hope that it inspires you in some way, encourages you in some way, and maybe this might be your day to be challenged in some way when it comes to the topic of rejection. There's two types of rejection we're talking about in today's sermon. The one type is us rejecting God's messenger, or rejecting God's ways, or rejecting God himself. And the other type of rejection is the flip side of that, where God rejects us. So we reject God, God rejects us. That's the kind of rejection we're talking about in this edition of What He Said. We find ourselves today in the Gospel of Mark. I've been working through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the three synoptic Gospels. And this week we're in the Gospel of Mark. We're in chapter 12. So if you know the Gospel of Mark, we're approaching the end of the story here. So Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he's stirring up trouble with the religious elite, and he's about to get himself killed. So we're kind of working our way there in the big story of Jesus' life and ministry. So Mark chapter 12, and today we're in verses 1 through 12. I'm in the Voos translation, as I have been throughout this series. And he began to be speaking to them in the form of illustration. So he likes to tell parables. He's telling them another parable. Here it is. A man, Jesus speaking here, planted a vineyard and set a hedge about it and digged a place for a winepress and built a tower and let it out, rented it out for his own advantage to vineyard men, and went away to foreign parts. So he's a landholder. He has a vineyard. He's leased it out to some winemakers. And he sent off to the vineyard men at the season, so at the time of harvest, a slave, or in modern terms, a servant, in order that from the vineyard men he might receive some of the fruit of the vine. So he wants his money. So it's harvest time. He knows that the winemakers are harvesting the grapes, and he wants his share, in order that he might receive some of the fruit of the vine. Verse 3, and having taken him, so the vineyard workers take that servant, they beat him severely and sent him off empty. And again, the master sent off to them another slave, and that one they knocked about the head and grossly insulted. This is cool. Grossly insulted. Some scholars think that this means they had their way with him sexually. That's would have been a gross insult in the culture of that day. They beat him severely about the head and grossly insulted him. And another he sent off, and that one they killed. So it's escalating here, and many others. Some, on the one hand, beating severely, and others on the one hand, killing. So these guys this is a problem. So the master's not living there. He keeps sending these messengers to get his rent, and shenanigans are ensuing. Verse 6. Yet one he had, a son, a beloved one. So here's now where Jesus is turning the corner to kind of make this about him and God his Father. One he had, a son, a beloved one. He sent him off last to them, saying, they will reverence my son. So in another version that you might be familiar with, he says, him they will respect. Okay, so he's going to send his son now. This is his last resort. It's like, they've abused and killed all the other ones I've sent. My son, they will respect. But those vineyard men said to themselves, verse 7, this is the heir. So they know that this is the guy who's going to inherit the vineyard that they're renting from the master. Come, let us be putting him to death, and ours shall be the inheritance. So on the one hand, they're evil. On the other hand, they're stupid, because you really think the Father's going to let you get away with this? But it is what it is. And having taken him, verse 8, they killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. Verse 9, what will the master of the vineyard do? So now Jesus moves to the application. He will come and destroy the vineyard men, and will give the vineyard to others. And did you not even read this scripture? A stone which the builders rejected, after having put it to the test for the purpose of approving it, and finding that it did not meet their specifications. This became the head of the corner. From the Lord came this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So this is the famous cornerstone sequence. The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Verse 12, and they were seeking to seize him, but they were afraid of the crowd. So as usual, Jesus has a big entourage, lots of people. He's very popular, and so they wanted to grab him, but he's surrounded by, many, many, many people, so they were afraid. For they knew that with reference to them, he had given this illustration, so they knew that this parable he told was about them. This is the Jewish religious elite, and having left him, they went off. So this is a cool story that Jesus tells to basically disrespect the religious elite in Jerusalem. In this story, basically, he says Judaism's over. It's obsolete. There's a new way, and I, says Jesus, am the cornerstone. So this is really why he ends up getting killed by these guys, right? Because he's saying stuff that's not just inflammatory. He's saying stuff that is so inflammatory, if it were to be applied by the people who were following Jesus, it would bring an end to Judaism as they knew it. And of course, all these many years later, I think as you see the flourishing of Christianity when it's healthy, you do see that Judaism has become, a second-class citizen as compared to just the huge, huge growth of Christianity and Christendom throughout the world. Now, look, I know we're not talking about this today. I know that Christendom has a lot of problems, and the church world is crooked and bent in a lot of really depressing ways. So we need to kind of put that to the side and think here about authentic or true Christianity. People who are following Jesus in a real way, having their lives transformed as a result, and then having a huge impact, a positive impact on the world as they begin to live the way of Jesus. That's what he's talking about. He's saying, basically, I've come to replace the old legalistic way with the new way of love. And Jesus says he is the cornerstone. He is the linchpin. And so the religious elite who were in control of the Jewish system, they're not having it. They are not happy about this. And they realize that this story he's told about the vineyard and the evil winemakers and the master, they realize that he's telling this parable against them. He's saying that they are the evil winemakers, and that his father is the master, that he is the beloved son, and that their destiny is to be destroyed and replaced. So they reject him, he rejects them. That's where I get the whole two rejections thing. And so let's just unpack what this looks like, because obviously I think my key premise here is that we don't want to be rejected by God, right? Like, I don't want to end up in the shoes of these religious guys. That's what I'm afraid of, okay? So I'm a product of the Christian system. I'm a product of the churchy system. And so much of the work of my life has been deconstructing that. So trying to learn to walk away from what should be walked away from when it comes to churchianity, and learning to walk into what should be walked into when it comes to learning to follow Jesus. That's why my channel is called Unchurched. I'm trying to unchurch myself. I'm trying to learn what it means to follow Jesus. And as I wrestle with that, I hope that I can help you as perhaps you are wrestling with that. So that's our point here. That's the reason. So if these guys were rejected by Jesus because they rejected him, I don't want to be like these guys because I don't want to be rejected by Jesus. I want to be embraced by Jesus, and I want to learn to embrace everything that Jesus is. And I realize this is going to be the work of a lifetime. So that's where we get to the whole concept of rejection in today's text. So if you don't want to be rejected by God, first thing to do is to stop it with the self-interest. Okay, that's my first, hopefully, salient take-home point. We get it out of verse 7. And ours shall be the inheritance. So they've killed all the messengers he's sent so far. Finally, he sends his one beloved son. They say, this is the heir. If we kill him, the inheritance will be ours. And ours will be the inheritance. That's the part that strikes fear in my heart, because I know that that tendency exists in me. If that tendency exists in me, I'm sure that it exists in you as well. So as you're learning to walk in the way of Jesus, or even maybe just considering walking in the way of Jesus, something that you can and should do on a regular basis is run a self-interest inventory. Just look at your life, how you spend your life, how you spend your money, how you spend your time, what kind of relationships you have, what kind of relationships you don't have, how you prioritize the things in your life, and try and figure out the degree to which your life is leveraged solely towards self-interest. And what's really freaky about this is I think you'll find that your life is leveraged more towards self-interest than it is towards selfless love. And look, I'm the pot calling the kettle black. I know that this is true in me. This is the work of my life. This is the work of learning to live by faith, is recognizing those ways in which you're living self-interestedly, and learning to slowly disconnect yourself from those ways, those habits, and begin in small measure, but then growing measure as you age and grow up with Jesus, walking in ways that allow you to live the selfless love of Jesus authentically, with the people around you. Ideally, the selfless love that we learn from Jesus, that we receive from Jesus, ought to infect every area of our life. It infects the way in which you approach your work. It infects the way in which you approach your life partner. It affects the way in which you approach, the people that you meet when you're walking down the streets, right? I'm quoting Sesame Street right there. So stop it with the self-interest. Me focus, it's a problem. We focus, right? So get a bunch of people who are me focused, put them together, you end up with an organization that's we focused. Church much, right? It's a big problem. So, and the problem starts with me, the problem starts with you, the problem starts with us, because we are relentlessly self-interested. I don't think it's stretching the point to say that self-interest is our original sin. I think if you go back to the story of the Garden of Eden, you see Adam and Eve, you see them disobeying God's command not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's real clear that self-interest lies at the root of it. Why? Because the snake was tempting them, what? To eat the tree. Why? So that they could become like God. Basically, the snake is saying, he's holding out on you. He knows that in the day in which you eat of the tree, you shall become like him, knowing good and evil. And Adam and Eve are like, hey, that sounds pretty good. Why should God hold out on us? Who's he to hold out on us? Doesn't he know how awesome we are? Self-interest. That's our original sin. So next time someone asks you, what's the original sin? You can quote Pastor Todd and say, the original sin is self-interest. And if we want to not be rejected by God, we need to walk away from that. We also need to stop it with the legalism. So point 1, stop it with the self-interest. Point 2, stop it with the legalism. We get this out of verse 9. What will the master do? He will destroy the vineyard men and give the vineyard to others. So, I'm hard-pressed to think of something more inflammatory that Jesus ever said. What he's saying basically here to these Jewish religious leaders is Judaism is going to be dead and gone and replaced with something new. That's why they killed him. Really, ultimately, that's why. Because he said he was equal with God. So he says in other sections in his story, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and my Father are one. So that's blasphemy as far as Judaism is concerned. So he's a blasphemer. And then here, he's basically saying, you're done with. God's going to destroy you and replace you with others. You couldn't say anything worse. So Judaism is dead. Now, how does this apply to you and me? Because you might not be Jewish. If you are, you're probably offended by this. What are you talking about? So it's tough, right? This is why Jesus is so offensive. This is why the way of Jesus can be seen as so offensive. And sometimes, people who claim to be Jesus followers apply Jesus' way in a way that is offensive. And that's difficult because we shouldn't be doing that, right? We should be applying the way of Jesus in a way that is loving and not offensive. But there's really no way around this here. He is saying Judaism's dead, and he's introducing a whole new way of approaching the divine life, a whole new way of connecting to God as friend. So here's how I think this applies to us. I'm not Jewish, so if Judaism is dead, it doesn't really affect me. But I am a Christian, product of the church world. And if Jesus looked at Judaism and said, that system of dead religion is dead and going to be done away with, it's not a stretch for me to see him looking at our current churchy religious system and saying that system is going to die and be replaced with something else. Of course, what's interesting to speak from a Jesus-following perspective is that the thing our current dying churchy system is going to be replaced with is the thing that dying Judaism was replaced with, which shows you that humans never change and proves that the way of Jesus is needed today more than ever. Because, how many people do you know who really their Christianity is nothing more than moralism? It's nothing more than legalism. It's nothing more than a system of control designed to stop people from doing bad things. And of course, they get to decide what those bad things are. It sounds harsh, but I'm convinced that it's true. What do you think? You just look around. And so Jesus is indicting that way of being, a legalistic way of being in the world. He's indicting that, saying that's dead, that's death, that's dying. And look, I can say this boldly because I know that this is a big theme in his teaching, not just in this section, but all throughout his teaching. He's just ripping on religious people all the time, just ripping on legalistic people all the time. And I get feedback, people are like, why are you always ripping on legalism and churchy people? Because Jesus was doing that. And I'm preaching a series called What He Said. And what he said was very uncomfortable when it comes to how religious people typically are in the world. That way is dead and dying. And it's going to be replaced with Jesus' way. And what is Jesus' way? Jesus' way is the way of selfless love that does no harm. That's the Jesus way. Okay, it's just, there's no way around it. Let me just prove it to you from the text, okay? So let's just read verses 10 through 12 real quick as we close. So here we go, verse 10. And did you not even read this scripture? A stone which the builders rejected after having put it to the test for the purpose of approving it and finding that it did not meet their specifications. This became the head of the corner. From the Lord came this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And they were seeking to seize him, but were fearing the crowd, for they knew that with reference to him, he had given this illustration. This, the stone that the builders rejected, has become the chief cornerstone. So make no bones about it. Jesus is saying he's the new way. He's the cornerstone. He's the linchpin. Jesus is saying it's all about me. Not me, Jesus. Jesus is saying it's all about Jesus. Jesus is saying that relationship with God comes down to him. It comes down to relationship to him and through him. That's the key. He is the key to everything. He says he is the cornerstone. Now, I've told you this before, but maybe you're here for the first time. You're hearing this for the first time. I was in the digs beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem several years ago, and a friend of mine who was kind of in charge of that area allowed me to jump down into the live dig where they just uncovered the cornerstone of the temple. So the cornerstone at the base of the temple wall sitting on the bedrock of Mount Moriah. I literally knelt in the mud and kissed the cornerstone. Now I know that that cornerstone is just a rock, but that cornerstone symbolizes Jesus. And I bet that he was standing on the ground somewhere near there and was pointing to the cornerstone when he said this. I don't know that for sure, but I wouldn't be shocked. We know that he was in the habit of teaching often in that area of the temple courts. The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Jesus says, without equivocation, he is the key. And his way that he was teaching to his followers and that he's still teaching to us today is the way of selfless love. I'm going to talk to you about that in a couple weeks. Okay, it's from Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40. I reference it all the time. It's the heart of my life and ministry, learning the love of God and the love of neighbor as you learn the love of self. That's what it all comes down to. And so Jesus is saying that's what it's about. It's not about your religious system. It's not about your legalistic system. It's about him and his way. And his way is about selfless love that does no harm. That's the key to harmony with God. And that's the key to harmony with your fellow humans. So if you don't want to be rejected by God, if you don't want to be rejected by others, if you want to learn to live in harmony with God, if you want to learn to live in harmony with others, you need to learn the way of selfless love that does no harm. And you need to walk away from whatever religious legalistic system you were raised in, whatever religious legalistic system you were taught is the key to everything. It's not, it's wrong, it's dead and dying, it's vanishing, it's being done away with, it's being replaced with Jesus and his way. And Jesus and his way all comes down to selfless love that does no harm. Embrace Jesus. That's how you learn to embrace others. As you embrace Jesus, and you learn to embrace others, that's how you are embraced by the divine life. Okay, most people's lives are so out of sync because they don't live this way at all. And I'm just beginning to learn what it means to live this way, and that's what I'm inviting you to do. Because look, to avoid rejection, you want to be connected to God. To be connected to God, you need to learn and then walk in the way of love. Next week, what he said about settling disputes.